Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Gut Girls podcast. We are in episode 4, and I'm particularly excited about this one because I'm going to kind of do the hosting this time. I obviously have my partner, Angela, is on the call as well.
Hey everyone.
And when we start this podcast, we are really I'm particularly excited, like I said, because in the past several years that we've kind of developed the into what is now the Gut Girls. We've had lots of different Instagram handles. We've worked with hundreds of different people at this point, and we've kind of been a little bit all over the place. But one thing that stayed steady has really been that we talk a lot about my transformation, about Diana's gut health and Diana's healing journey and all of those things. But now I'm excited that we're going to learn a little bit more about Angela. And we talked on the past podcast that we've met twice in person at this point. And so, we really haven't. I don't even know that much about your history. And so in this episode, we're going to go way back and start with your childhood. I'm really kind of curious, like, have you always been interested in, eating healthy? What was your childhood like growing up? What did y'all eat? And, is this something that you started when you were at a very young age? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I'm excited to share that. So it's interesting. So I'm Italian. I've got some deep Italian genes in my family. And I say that because that's kind of what stands out to me about being a little girl is the Italian meals. And they were all homemade. Like my grandparents, I remember, would spend hours over the stove. One meal that my grandpa particularly made every Sunday for us was like polenta. And I mean, he would stir that. It was like an hour or 2 hour process where he had to stir it and just keep going. And like these meals were like hours of preparation. And most of those ingredients came from their garden. So it was fresh ingredients that they grew outside. I remember having honestly like fresh garden lettuce. I say that because the taste is so different if you guys have ever had fresh garden lettuce. And my other grandparents had a compost pile that was like massive. I mean, I literally remember being like, what is this? Like, it smells, it's got all kinds of scraps in it. And like, why is she doing this? Like, I didn't quite understand, but it was just what my family did. So I definitely had this really kind of like split um, view on nutrition because if you think about it, Diana, so I was born in like the mid 80s. And so my grandparents had this more, natural approach to cooking and eating. But then when I would be with my parents, they would cook, don't get me wrong. But we also then would, I think, get caught up in the cultural shift at that time of like, eating, oh my God, Velveeta shells and cheese, I think about as like a staple. It was like one of my favorite things. I mean, we definitely, had our pizza and taco nights. And so I kind of got a little taste of both. Um, and it's interesting because now that I reflect back, I mean, man, what a blessing that was, right? To have your grandparents like cook homemade pies. We had apple trees in my grandparents' yard. So my grandma particularly would cook homemade apple pie. And I guess I just thought that a lot of people lived like that, but that was like my really young years. Like I remember that in my really young years for sure.
Mm. That's really interesting that, I mean, it is kind of cool that you had a little bit of both. Usually it's sort of one or the other. Like, I mentioned when we kind of went through mine, ours was generally just convenience, quick, fast on the go. Did you eat happy meals? And I think the other day you told me that you ate fig Newtons because we were talking about figs and whether or not those are healthy and those kind of things. And you're like, I definitely ate fig Newtons as a kid.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things my grandma, so speaking of like, they definitely grew from the garden, but my grandma had this canister that I think she stocked it just for me with Fig Newtons because I loved them. And so I knew exactly where they were. And I would go to her house and I would grab the Fig Newtons and they were always fresh. You know what I mean? It's not like they'd been sitting there for weeks at a time. And then another thing, what's interesting is my mom had what I think it's called like a curio cupboard, if I'm even saying that right, where you have like the glass that you could just see through, right?
Mhm.
Diana, I don't think I ever told you this. You're going to die. It was filled with the Happy Meal characters, and particularly the Bernstein Bears. I don't know if you or
I
anyone listening can
absolutely
relate.
remember the Bernstein Bears. Yeah. And I hope my brother is listening to this too, because
It was, yeah, it was, I mean, from top to bottom, like stacked full of those from our Happy Meals.
yeah, you collected Bernstein Bears from the Happy Meals at
Mhm.
McDonald's. I
Yeah,
mean, they had great marketing, right? I
they
mean,
did.
genius. It
Yeah.
is. Okay, so you've told us a little bit about what you ate. It sounds like you spent quite a bit of time with your grandparents, but with your parents, you were on the go and busy, and so y'all would still grab fast food, McDonald's, whatever. So, I mean, what like did you know when you were little that you wanted to be a chiropractor? I mean, what were kind of some of those what were influences in your life, not just on nutrition and things, but about kind of what started shaping your career?
That's an interesting question too. I mean, I think that uh, it's interesting seeing, my grandma, I mean, the recipe books, again, I think it does go back to some of the nutrition, like the recipe books that they had that were all homemade, seeing everything grown. And I think kind of tasting the difference as much as I was a kid and I don't think that I necessarily knew better. My nervous system definitely remembers the taste of homemade food versus fast food. You know what I mean? And so I
Mm,
think even early on, my grandma on my dad's side particularly seemed to go against the grain. If and I say this, and y'all can laugh if you have grandparents like this or elderly folks in your family that you're close to, but she would be prescribed something and she wouldn't follow it. I mean, she would be like, you know what, I think I need this much of it versus the whole thing. Like she stood out to me because she listened more to her body than she did what the advice was given, to her. Now, I mean, she definitely would take the medicine if she needed it, but she just kind of did. It was different. It wasn't like she just obeyed every little thing that was told to her. You know what I mean? And so I
hmm.
think she got me curious, if I'm being honest, of like, oh, so, you're kind of paying attention to this inner dialogue, and so that I think had been there deep into my like nervous system of, this is interesting and this stood out to me.
Yeah.
But then I have to be honest, and I'm curious if you can relate growing up, the pressure of trying to figure out what you want to be. And
Hmm.
in that time, and maybe it's different this day and age because you have technology, but it was like, hey, you're going to be a doctor, a lawyer, or something in business if you want to be somebody in life. Like, I just remember those being like my three choices. I don't,
Yeah, maybe that's like from career day. It's like those are the things
yeah.
that you could dress up as, right?
Yes, I definitely think the culture influenced that in a way.
Hmm.
And now let me also tell folks that are listening, I am the youngest of three girls. So I'm the baby. So I think it had to do with I saw this grandma that didn't necessarily follow the rules. And then culture of like, you've got to be a doctor or a lawyer. And I didn't really just have interest in being a lawyer. And so I kind of went that doctor route. And I think from a young age, I remember I had a journal and I literally wrote I made a decision a long time ago. I wish I still had that journal, but I don't. But like I remember writing it down and there was just no turning back after that particular.
Mm.
Yeah.
That's so cool. I love that. So, okay, so if you kind of do that, that started shaping you when you were a child. Take us like, more teenage years into high school and things. I know we've talked a lot about the fact that in high school we were both athletes and, how we ate and how that kind of affected us. But take us a little bit deeper because I think there's a little more that you've never shared that is some struggles that you had.
Yeah, it's interesting because if people listen to your story, that's kind of when some of your, you know, I think changes of health and well-being took place. Like you said, if you guys listen back, Diana was running down a basketball court, living off of like nothing, with ingredients and expecting to like, win every game. And honestly, those years were kind of the same for me. And so I don't know if it's like just those years. I mean, Dinah, we're parents of girls, like, and your girls are kind of more in that age. It's a hard time. I think in general for girls, I'm sure for boys too, but I can only speak from what I know, where there's just a lot of influence from your, peers at that time. You even said back in your story, like a lot of the labeling at that point was like fat free. You know what I mean? So I think there was cultural pressure at that point that shifted my mindset on health. There was the labeling, and it was at that point that I honestly ate more on the go than I ever did. So you see this transition from me as a child growing up on like better food. We honestly, even just to say this, growing up, I don't remember ever being on like lots of antibiotics. I do remember taking like Augmentin for maybe like strep or something like once, you know what I mean? Like, but we rarely ever did antibiotics. I think we just didn't have to. We just were blessed with, probably good genetics. And again, eating from the garden like probably helped at that point. But then when I got into these years, everything kind of shifted, I think, where I actually started having a deep uh, issue with eating in general. So I started what I would call what it is bulimia at that time, and but it didn't start like I'm kind of struggling to say that because it didn't start off that way. You know what I mean? It was just this like food didn't seem to be as safe anymore all of a sudden. And so I think at first I was like, oh gosh, I don't want to eat this because I don't want to get fat. I have to play sports. I played every sport. I mean, same with you, Diana. I played volleyball, basketball. I tried cheerleading. I did gymnastics. I did softball. And so it was like, gosh, what do I eat? I never had education around that to fuel my body, but yet I wanted to, fit into the cheerleading outfit. I wanted to flip down the gymnastic floor mat. And so in my head, it was like, well, the less weight there is, probably the better, And so that's where it didn't start off as bulimia, but as years went on in high school and in the beginning of college, yeah, I mean, it developed into full on bulimia where I really struggled with food a lot.
That's tough. I mean, and it, like you said, it's sort of the lack of education, right? I mean, and not really understanding our body and how to kind of balance it all out well, right? And what fuels your body. What I'm curious, like, what would you go back and tell that girl if you could go back and tell her? What would you say?
Mm, isn't that such a like emotional question? Because um, I would tell her. I just don't know if she would understand. You
Mm-hmm.
know what I mean? But I would tell her like food is medicine. And if you want to flip high
Mm.
on the gymnastics floor and you want to, tumble with the cheerleaders, like you need to eat this food. Like I would love to be able to tell her, like, I have the answer. You know what I mean? Like, this is how you fuel your body. But again, I don't know that she would have listened. It was that age where you kind of feel like know it all in a sense. So it's a tough age, but and also because you don't have a lot of other people doing it, right? So when you're the only one, and I know this, Diana, with your girls, it's like sometimes when you're the only one, it's like, really, as a kid, they're like, is my mom really telling me the truth, or is she just making my life hard right now? Like,
Yes.
you know.
Yeah, it definitely makes it challenging. You know, Actually, my daughter's in high school, and even a lot of her friends, it's very obvious when they sit down to eat lunch that, JC Kate has brought her meal from home that she, heated up before she left. And it's whole foods, right? And so they're like, what, JC Kate, what are you eating today? And they've just grabbed whatever, a packaged whatever. And so she is a little bit outside that norm. So it is, I would imagine that, looking back, that is really challenging. And if you didn't have that education, but such a powerful story. And what's so cool now is that that, and you can provide that education for your girls when they start to go through the same things, and teaching them at an early age is so awesome. So walk us through kind of the next years, like into into college, like did that sort of continue? And I know that I believe you actually even worked in a pharmacy, right? As a pharmacy tech. So, I mean, tell us even more. How did that shape you a little bit? Because, you have these whole foods that you're learning to eat. Occasionally you would collect the Bernstein Bears when you were a kid, from the McDonald's, but you had a pretty good balance. But then you go through these struggles with the bulimia, but and then you get this job as a pharmacy tech. And so you're kind of all over the place a little bit, right? So tell us a little bit about that and like, what did you learn about medicine and healing during that time?
Yeah, so I'm going to back up just a little for everyone to kind of get this deep understanding of it. Like you said, it was kind of a turmoil. There was a lot of tension, I think, around food for me at that time in my life. And so when we go back to high school real quick, that when I was going through that with the bulimia and all of that, that is when I developed cystic acne. So if anyone has
Mm.
ever had that, it is the most painful thing when it is just covering your face. To be able to sleep at night, you feel pain when you lay your head down on the pillow. And then, there's times when I remember like certain one of those little cystic, um, it's almost like a fluid filled sac, right? And like sometimes they don't, you don't feel the fluid. It's actually kind of hard, but you know that there's something underneath it. Sometimes they would even just drain. And that's embarrassing. So like, I mean, I'm talking like I had guys, the worst cystic acne, I think, out there, even though maybe I'm sure that there's worse. But it was just at that point too, very like, oh gosh, you know what I mean? Like I did not like myself at that point, you know what I mean? Like in high school. And so my mom would take me to the dermatologist and they would inject right into that cystic all over my face, those cystic spots. And that was
Mm.
painful and it would help a little bit. But why I'm really going back to that for a second before I answer your question about the pharmacy thing is because it's interesting to me that I was so out seeking the superficial, like, solution. You know what I mean? Like, again, I didn't have the education. So I was like, man, if I have to get an injection and it's going to clear this up, like, I'm just going to do it. Right. Like, I was just
Mm.
desperate. And we tried everything. We did like the proactive. Do y'all remember like,
Mm.
yeah, all the lines out there for acne? We tried them and it would help a little bit. But there was a clear correlation now looking back that when my bulimia was out of control, my skin was out of control.
Mm. Yeah, not getting the nutrients you needed and all of them. There's so much that played into that, right? Because we know
Oh,
that gut skin connection, which we're going to talk about in some of the episodes. We're going to talk about how the skin is connected to the gut.
oh yeah, it excites me. Now you can kind of understand too when people are talking with us about their health issues. I get excited because I remember being that person, where I
Yeah.
was like desperate for healing, but I didn't realize the blood sugar roller coaster my body was on with food and bulimia, and I just never was really educated. Oh my gosh, I remember drinking chocolate milk from like we had gallons of chocolate milk in my refrigerator, and I remember drinking that like it was nothing. You know what I mean? Just oh gosh, like I kind of cringe thinking back at some of that. But so so that's where I think I was at, really just miserable with where my body was, but not having a way out. And so when I got those shots from the dermatologist, I think in my head I was like, okay, I was desperate for healing and this was going to bring it to me. Even though it hadn't yet, I was like, okay, there's an answer. And it's in injections and pharmaceuticals. Like I just think that my mind was like, I'm going to learn everything about this because it's going to
Mm.
heal me, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
So then this now takes you back to that question about pharmacy, right? So then I started
Okay.
as a pharmacy technician. And what's so crazy, well, not crazy, we know, but it was just not what I thought it was going to be. I'm going to say this because I don't want to forget this part because it really touched me a lot as to why I didn't stick with pharmacy. But I would ring patients out. So as a pharmacy technician, you're filling the prescriptions, you're doing everything with the pharmacist, but they're signing off on it. But then you're also serving the person that comes to get their prescription. So you're ringing them out.
All right.
And I remember people would leave with grocery bags. I'm talking like as if you came to the grocery store to buy your food, they would leave with grocery bags full of pharmaceuticals.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, can we just pause there for a second? Like, I have
That
goosebumps
is,
saying that.
I do feel like we have to pause for a second. That is a lot of
Yeah.
medication. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that I was like, well, this doesn't seem right. Like, so there was this turmoil within me of like, oh gosh, I thought this was the answer. But then look at these people. And then they wouldn't just come, it's not like people just came happily and got their grocery bag. They came in pain. They were miserable. I, as the pharmacy technician, had to deal with that. And listen, I'm not, for anyone listening that's in pain, I'm not putting you down. Pain will change you. I mean, I feel more empathetic for people in pain than I ever have because I've been so close and so intimate with them, even way back then when I was younger. I mean, they would come to the counter and you could just tell how like they were in such deep aching pain. And if their prescription was off and they had to, like, we had to figure it out, the fact that they had to deal with another burden, it was like they would snap at me. And I was just like, man, this can't be how you people want to live in pain, snappy, miserable, depending on grocery bags of pharmaceuticals. Like it just it just felt so wrong, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, that, well, I mean, that definitely will leave a lasting impact on your life too. Remembering how those people felt, kind of in the same way. I mean, like you said, you kind of sympathize with them. And I mean, I feel like I do too. And that's why a lot of times we share my story because that's my story. So, I mean, we should certainly share yours too, right? I mean, that's all part of the Gut Girls. And I feel like that's why you do such a great job, like with our clients in the Optimize Your Gut program, where you just really can meet them where they are. So, whether it's my story, whether it's your story, or whether it's the hundreds and probably thousands of people at this point that you've helped and, looked at their stool test and understood why they feel those those pains and some of those things, like you just do such a great job meeting the people where they are. So I thank you personally for that because you've helped change my life, and I know I had to put in the hard work, but you've been such great guidance in that. And so is that kind of your shifting point where you saw these grocery bags full of stuff, like, but I think, did you initially want to go to pharmacy school? You kind of wanted to go to pharmacy school, but then you ended up not, I think you said you ended up not getting in. So tell us a little bit about that. And then where did that shift kind of into chiropractic care?
Yeah, so that's interesting. Hindsight is a blessing because I remember the day. So you have to take your PCATs to get into pharmacy school, just like you have to take your MCATs to get into medical school.
Mm-hmm.
And so I took my PCATs, and I think it's part of me, if I'm being honest, the reason I followed up with taking the PCAT was because I felt like I could still change something. Like I just was like, okay, this feels wrong, but maybe I can have a voice. You know what I mean? And maybe I
Mm-hmm.
can do things differently. But it was a blessing because I didn't get in. I didn't pass the PCAT actually, and so um, I was devastated. And I was ready. I mean, had the books out, ready to study again and just do it a second time and pass it. And it
Mm-hmm.
was in that season where my mom, thank God, moms have a good intuition, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah, she was like, I just don't know if this is for you, Angela. Like, and at that time, she had known a friend whose daughter was entering chiropractic school. And she was like, this person would maybe go talk to her. Like, I think my mom just saw the deep frustration. And so she was like, it might not even be this, but just go talk to this person and see. So thank heavens for my mom's intuition. And so it
Mm-hmm.
kind of just went like, I was like, why not? Let's shadow some chiropractors and see what's going on. And it was life changing, Diana, when I think so now if you guys can understand the depth of emotion I had checking people out at the pharmacy, to watching a chiropractor welcome someone into their office, put their hands on them, and see everything that they were carrying that day in their body, like the defensiveness and the tiredness and the fatigue, just like kind of wash away for a minute. Like to see that, I was like, oh my gosh, okay, now I can talk to that person, right? Like, if
Mm-hmm.
I could just get my hands on them and help them just like their nervous system settle, then I can have the conversation about health and well being, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so it kind of clicked for me. And I didn't expect that to happen. Like I didn't really even know what chiropractic was. But I think from it was this little girl at the counter to then seeing, you know, a shadowing at the time, seeing this doctor put their hands on this patient in the chiropractic world. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's it. Like I didn't know what it was at the time really, but I was like, that's the kind of medicine I want to
Yeah.
practice.
It's the whole 180, like looking at the person as a whole body, right? So you talk about that kind of being your shift. So that is so cool that you went from, from kind of one perspective to the other. And like you've said before, and we've discussed before, we're not anti-medication, but it's like, where do we look for the root of what's going on? And how do we look at the whole body as a whole system instead of just like pulling out one little piece and trying to pick out those pieces. So I, for one, am really glad that your path changed, because I have a feeling I probably wouldn't have met you if you were a pharmacist out there somewhere. um so that's what we're really this kind of takes us into this new shift where you're a chiropractor, and I really want to kind of dive in really on the next episode. We're going to talk even more about how it even shifted even more into functional medicine. So tell us maybe just a little snippet of that before we close up here today.
Yeah, let me give you a little bit about once I got into chiropractic school. I think that what we'll kind of uncover in the next episode is this sense of still yet that there's got to be more. So if you've listened so far to this episode, you know that there's this like drive in me, and I can't explain where it came from. Again, maybe back when I was talking about my grandma who just kind of was like, I'm going to drive my own bus here, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I think that that's what is in me, and it's funny because my mom would call it stubbornness. But I even got into chiropractic school and I was like, okay, this makes more sense, right? This makes so much more sense. Treating the body, like you said, as a whole. But there was still something missing. And I think, to be honest, you're always trying to heal yourself. Like if you talk to people who become successful in a business, it's usually because they have a story. Like look at you, Diane, like you have a story within that, right?
Right.
And so I think for me, there was something that I was like, and I'll say this because my mom would admit this hardcore if you ever interviewed you, but something my mom always said to me when she wanted to help me through my bulimia, but she didn't know how, is she just looked me in the eyes and she said, Angela, we are strong like bull. She said, we are strong women. Like, this isn't how we approach life. And I know for a lot of people, like that seems like tough love. But I'll say this, why I'm mentioning it is because then what it set into me is like, why can't I be like my mom said, we are strong like bull. Like there's got to be something that's not connecting in my brain all the way, that I can't just turn this off, right? Like I can't just shut it
Mm-hmm.
off. And so I think when I got into chiropractic school, surprisingly, being adjusted and just being in that field, I didn't cling to it the same way that I did in high school, but it still was there every now and then. And I started to notice it came out more when I was under high stress.
Mm.
And so that's when I would just go back to this and to kind of reiterate, like I knew there was more, there was something in me that was, I could see the inflammation on me. Like if you look back at pictures, I wasn't overweight, but you can see the puffiness on like someone's face. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
When you see they're inflamed. And so I think I felt this deep connection of like, okay, this chiropractic, work is helping me, but there's this deep level of inflammation that I just feel like it's not touching. And I really felt that if I could get a grip on that, that my brain would work better. Like I would have a little bit more sense of clarity, a little bit more self-regulation under stress. You know what I mean? And I
Mm-hmm.
just felt that inside, but I didn't know how to say that, but I just kept seeking it. Like once I got into chiropractic school. So then that's what led me into that functional medicine piece of chiropractic. And so that's kind of what you were like dabbling, giving us a little teaser about. That's what we're going to kind of dive into in the next episode, because I just kept searching for like that root. I knew it was there.
Yes. Well, we are all looking forward to hearing kind of part two of that. And, we've kind of heard up until this point, but, that shift into, fully healing your body, but then and then shifting again to healing others, right? And to help give them the tools and the support and the education and things that they need. And I know that that's really kind of what your passion is, and treating the whole body. So on the next episode, we will kind of dive even deeper into that and see and hear more about what Angela's story is with how the turning point of functional medicine really kind of changed everything for her, and now it's how it changed for her family and for all of our Gut Girls clients. So we are thankful that you guys listened today, and we hope you join us on the next episode when we do part 2 of Angela's story.
The information provided on this podcast, including all episodes, show notes, and related content, is for informational and educational purposes only. It is not intended as medical advice and should not be used to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. The views expressed by the host and guests of the Gut Girls podcast are their own and do not reflect the official policy or position of Gut Girls LLC or any other affiliated organizations. While we are trained health professionals and certified health coaches, we are not acting in a licensed clinical capacity on this platform. Any recommendations made on this podcast, including those related to diet, supplements, lifestyle, and lab testing, are general wellness strategies intended for educational use. Always consult with your licensed healthcare provider before implementing any information heard here, especially if you have a medical condition, are taking prescription medications, or are under medical supervision. By listening to this podcast, you agree not to use this content as medical advice to treat yourself or others. Neither Gut Girls LLC nor the podcast hosts or any guests shall be held liable for any damage, loss, or injury caused by the use of this information.